and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at a Portal deck. We did look at one not too long ago. This one is a fair bit different, honestly. This one is still an artifact Portal deck, but it's very, very different. It's not running Acceleradium. You've got one single Neapolitan entity for matchups like Dragon and Forest, where you really want to be blocking out some extra damage, making those matches slightly better. You're only running a single Spinaria, which is an interesting one, and you're just a few other cards that you don't usually see in very many common artifact decks. You know, Catcanonia was very early on, but then dropped off kind of later on. Ironforge Fighter, not seen as much, but is a great alternate win con over Saphira, which Saphira is still good, it's just Ironforge does give you a different kind of win condition, which makes the deck a little more interesting. So it's very different in the way that you go into the mindset. This deck is favoring more aggressive and board flood over just setting up wins, which is how I usually play Portal. This deck was actually recommended to me by a friend called Tonya. She recommended it. She's really into Portal. She was on the top 100 list for quite a while. Now, I'll leave a link to the guy's Twitter who actually made this deck in the description below, right below the deck list, so you guys can check it out and just see if you're interested. Honestly, I had some fun with this deck. It's a little iffy, but I think the more I play it, the better I'm getting at it, so that's kind of what you want. So we'll get right into the video and check it out. So our first game is a Portal versus Dragon. A little bit of an awkward match, but it really does highlight how well Neapolitan Entity works in these kind of decks and these kind of matchups, and really just highlights what you want to be able to do to Dragon decks, and really how you can limit what they actually have. So we start off with a pretty good hand, drawing Des X, really great in this deck in particular. The deck I usually play, which you can find other videos of on my channel if you guys want to check that out, is not as reliant on Des as this deck is, but at the same time this deck seems to have a lot easier time drawing out into the early game, which is either just really good RNG or the fact that this card and deck, is running a lot of draw power in it and really focusing on that draw power. So I decided to throw the Mecha Wing Swordsman. I could have easily thrown the Mecha Soldier, but I've already got a setup for double Magisteel Lion anyway next turn, so I thought just putting some 2/2 bodies on the board would at least draw my opponent's attention and let me just sneak in a little more damage than just throwing a 2/3 for them to expect a Analyzing Artifact. This way it throws just a little curve into their plan. We do get another mechanic as well, which fits really nicely, meaning we can actually play the Soldier and the Lion next turn and keep the artifact if we want, or just throw the artifact straight into them. So either way, the start of this match was really in my favor. It's kind of the mid game that it starts to fall apart, and it's really difficult to kind of steamroll from there. You really need to have Des work on the turn you play it, which can be a little difficult. So we do get the Icarus, which if I had have planned this out really well, going with this Machine Soldier, it works nicely. The only thing I can do is though, play Does, which really doesn't feel great. I do decide just to throw 8 to their face. Putting them to 9 as quickly as possible was kind of the aim. I mean, the odds of them clearing this is fairly high, so really all I can do is push as much damage as I can, as quickly as I can, so that when we get to those later turns, I don't have to take as big a chunk out of their health as we would have if I hadn't have hit them in the early game. And that Sakura Israfil though, like, that's all you ever see from Dragon. I mean, even Forest now and some other Shadow decks I've seen, you know, the neutral package is coming back in a bigger way than it ever probably has. Even in Wonderland Dreams, while it was huge, it's coming back even harder with just the Sakura Israfil for board clears. Biofabrication though does fill up our deck pretty nicely, and being able to trade the Analyzing Artifact will let me get the Resonance off anyway, so it's not too bad at all. Plus I get to keep my Des alive, which is always nice. We do end up having to throw away the Otherworld Rift though, which is a bit of a downside considering what we're up against. I would have preferred to have that Rift where I needed it. But from here is where things get a little more interesting. They've already dropped Tilting at Windmills, meaning every single turn is a potential death for me. I've got to be able to ward up, block out damage, and just purely survive going forward. Of course, a Dread Scene into Bahamut is basically a guaranteed lethal, but at least I have a chance at that point. Plus, we do end up with the Neapolitan Entity, which does block out any of those kind of shenanigans where they could have killed me in one shot. So, really helpful amulet to have, and buys me at least 4 turns, thanks to using it with an artifact in my hand. They do go for the Israfil though, a little bit of an annoying card, but not too bad. I mean, it gets instantly removed, which is a plus, and we can easily just throw our own damage out there. And really at this point, we're just digging for more cards that we can play that have an advantage against them. Really nothing too crazy going into our hand or out of our hand at this point. I mean, we get the 2 damage to their face, we draw a whole new hand, we get a couple of Radiants and the Synthetic Beast, which is perfect, especially with Biofabrication. We can use the Biofabrication on the Analyzing Artifact, or we can use it on the Radiant. Either one is going to be a pretty solid option, just really depends on what our opponent ends up going for. They are slowly pinging me damage though, which is a little dangerous. But I do decide to go for the double artifacts. And Biofabrication does take us out of Resonance. I probably should have went for the Radiant, honestly, and just thrown that to the board instead, getting that extra damage into their face. Even though we did still get 1 Radiant, I'm pretty sure I could have maybe, if I was lucky, scored 2. Although off the top of my head, I couldn't work out that math. If I thought about it a little bit more, I probably could, but either way, we got some damage in, we set up a board, we've got a nice amount of draw power for this turn. We really limit what our opponent can play, which is what you want, and we're blocking out enough damage, which is the important part. All at the same time trying to set up Synthetic Beast, which at this point still isn't lethal. We are close to lethal, but not quite there. Because this Sybil will put us just 3 away from lethal. So even if I just threw the Synthetic Beast to the board, it wouldn't have been enough. It would have been 1 short, even with this 2-1 on board. But we do get another Otherworld Rift, so all we've got to do is stay out of Resonance. If we can stay out of Resonance, then we can keep the Beast and hopefully use it next turn. And even if they don't clear this board, they're dead anyway. So I'm really making a situation where they're forced to trade. If they don't trade, they're dead. If they do trade, they're dead. Either way, I'm in a favourable position against them at this point. So this Israfil's great for them, removing stuff. The Israfil alone isn't quite enough to clear everything. But the Blazing Breath on top of it does pick that off nicely. And then Saphira. Turn 10's like points going straight to the board. I really needed that to work out in my favour, because next turn I pretty much would have been dead to any neutral card. Luckily, the planning those couple of turns earlier to get Saphira up as much as I could, while at the same time putting enough pressure, turned out to work quite nicely. Our next game is Portal versus Portal. So because Portal decks can be so different, you've always got to be a little careful just to not know what they're going to expect, I guess. The cards that are in Portal can vary so wildly for playstyles that it's actually surprising. Like, I play Portal enough that I know all of its basic structures. The problem is you don't know what kind of wild cards to expect, which in this deck happens to be the Ironforge Fighter, which just throws out those, sorry, off the top of my head I forgot what they're called, Radiant Artifacts. There we go. Radiant Artifacts getting thrown to the board all of the time. Makes it really hard for a lot of classes to counter, whereas my traditional Portal list that I tend to run more regularly is more board pressure orientated in regards to ancient artifacts. So I tend to push more ancient artifacts to the board all the time, trying to trade them off and build up Saphiras. I run 3 Saphiras in my normal Portal deck compared to this deck that only has 1, which is a substantial difference in playstyle. One playstyle is playing a more mid-range to control orientated deck, and the other is playing a much more aggressive aggro style deck. Still with a lot of mid-range properties, I would still lean this deck towards being more aggressive than mid-range. It just happens that the couple of cards that you really use to finish, or the combos that you use to finish, are more late game. Doesn't necessarily make it a control deck, doesn't necessarily make it a mid-range deck. The deck itself is very, very aggressive. So that's why I would put this deck in particular in that kind of category, whereas my other one I do put in a more mid-range to control variation. And as you can see, this one is an Acceleradium based Portal, which is your more common Portal deck, I would say. Although you do see mixtures with things like Puppet Strings, which are becoming more and more common with the common forest matchups all the time, trying to deal with fairy boards and such with brambles. It's much easier to use something like puppet strings. But this matchup isn't too bad at all for me. I can pretty easily just play out what I want and continually deal damage to the opponent without really any concern. If they clear out my board, it's no real issue. If they trade, it's no real issue. The only real problem comes into if they try and be just as aggressive as I am and go as much face as they can. Then I have a little bit of a problem with the match. So we get a pretty good hand overall. I do decide to throw the Deus Ex Machina, and then this is where things get just a little bit iffy. I decide to throw the 6 damage to their face and put the evolve on my Deus Ex Machina. That way I get a little bit more damage in. I could have traded the 4-1 and a puppet, but I would have lost that extra 4 storm damage, and I probably only would have made up 2 of it with the evolve. So I felt like this overall was the better play to get that damage in as early as possible, while at the same time being able to just completely recycle everything in our hand anyway. Plus, it just happens that they mustn't have many artifacts in their hand. We can pretty easily whittle them down with the 6 damage here, leave them on 2, and put out as much pressure as we need. This is one of those matches where the aggression in this deck shows, where you can just snowball hands into better hands as you go. Especially since we have a free ancient artifact, an Otherworld Rift, Saphira, you name it, we've got it at this point. The only real issue becomes how many artifacts can they draw, how quickly, and how much damage can they deal to my board. Which obviously isn't enough if they're giving up this early on. So again, I just want to say this deck is a good amount of fun. Most decks are like this. Portal tends to be a pretty fun class to play, although you do have to have a little bit of RNG just to play it in general. You need a little bit of luck, but most of that can be mitigated through draw power and just careful planning. So I don't recommend this deck to any real new player. I recommend probably playing my Portal list, which is probably just a little bit easier to get the knack of. Whereas this one is much more straightforward with its aggression, which means you need to be careful of your health point, your opponent health point, what they could potentially play in every single matchup. It really is just one of those decks where matchup's important to affecting your playstyle, and you can't just go in always playing the exact same line of play. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe. As always, you'll find the deck list in the description below, along with a link to the author of this deck. And I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.